Hi y'all, this is video number 2 out of I don't know how many videos talking about the Russia collusion narrative, obstruction of justice, the Mueller report, that whole thing. The last one was on impeachment, going all the way back to Bill Clinton, so you can go check that out. Now, the longer I live, the more and more convinced I become that it's just not proper to have former high-ranking officials from the Justice Department go investigate things. Uh, you need to leave this to the line type people who are new and they haven't gotten set in this. They haven't developed the arrogance of I have become so important and reached these high offices of state that I can kind of do things the way I like to do them because that's how I like to do them. If you think about Comey when he was involved with the Clinton matter, the Clinton investigation, he was deciding that, well, you know, this is a special case. This is something I have to step away from the Justice Department on. The FBI is going to have to go do its own thing. I have to make this kind of decision or that kind of decision that's different from all the other kinds of decisions that people in the past would have to make in order to protect the department, to avoid all these things. He was doing ad hoc reasoning or ad hoc justification for why he was doing things differently than in any other case, like giving the statement about the declining to or recommending a declination of prosecution for Hillary Clinton, saying rude and bad things about her, which may be true or false. I mean, whether you think they're true or false is kind of beside the point. The point of it is that justice does not speak in press releases. Justice speaks through indictments and trials. And for the same reason that you can't put in an indictment the name of an unindicted co-conspirator, because when you name them, you are prejudicing them without giving them the opportunity on equal footing to reply in the very same forum, that works mischief to that person's interests. Whether the person is a good person or a bad person is completely irrelevant. The justice system depends on the proposition that the person is presumed to be innocent, even if they're not particularly good people, and that they have an absolute, unquestioned right to be confronted in open court to clear their name of the claims that the state or the government is making, and to make the government prove its case beyond all reasonable doubt to either the judge if they want to do a bench trial, the defendant, I mean, not the prosecution. If the defense wants a bench trial, then they get a judge. If they want a jury, they get a jury. But whatever it is, it's the same rules, level footing. The citizen or the person accused, even if they're an alien, is on the same footing as the government. For all the powers of the United States government, one lawyer can make one argument to one judge, and all the power of the United States recedes if the argument is a good one in court. And so when you do that press conference like he did, you are denying that person the right of reply to any to see what your evidence is, fairly presented, whatever, on equal footing in the same forum, on the same terms, where you're not getting an advantage that's unavailable to the other side, which is precisely what you get when the FBI director stands up in front of the FBI building or the Department of Justice building and says, "Hey, come on in, not lawyers, journalists. I have some tea to spill. Do carry on." And this was mentioned in the recommendations that were sent to Trump to terminate him, they didn't seem to be particularly needful, since apparently the president had already decided to fire him. He just wanted these as supporting evidence or something, or he really did want him because that was going to help him make the decision. I guess it depends on when the last time you talked to the president is, which version it might be, or perhaps a third version. Incidentally, just as an aside here, I firmly believe, in every fiber of my being, that the absolute hardest job in the world right now is to be Donald Trump's press secretary. I would be fired and I'd be Scaramucci'd out, but quicker, because I would have to answer every question. Well, thank you, journalist, for the question, blah, blah, blah. As of 7 seconds ago, when I spoke to the president, his position on this particular issue is the following. So I'd be gone in a heartbeat. He can literally change positions 5 or 6 times and not even a paragraph. But in any event, so Comey was, when you work in law enforcement, you do investigations and whatnot, you learn that there are types of people who break rules for very particular kinds of reasons, so that you can classify people into different types of offender or crusader, depending on how you want to put it. And one of those is the noble cause actor, the noble cause offender. And this is the type of person who, because their ultimate goal is a platonic good, or as near a platonic good as you're going to get on Earth, that any problems that arise where they have to bend a rule here, tell a little fib there, exaggerate here, it's all okay, because in the end what you're pursuing is just so good and great and wonderful and magnificent, and it would be terrific for the world if you get that, whatever the thing is at the end of the road. These are people who overestimate their own importance. They don't have realistic expectations or realistic goals for outcomes, which is precisely why they have to bend the rules. If they had a realistic estimation of their own abilities, their own importance and whatnot, and a realistic appraisal of the end state, then there would be, if it's possible, a pathway that you could follow that's proper, and a whole bunch of side pathways that are not proper. Comey is the kind that he considers himself to be important, that his reputation is like a good narcissist. It needs to be protected. The reputation of the FBI needs to be protected, and the ultimate goal is a good one. So it doesn't matter if he violates policies. I mean, these policies apply to other people with inferior moral goodness, with inferior aims for the future good of the world, and therefore I shouldn't be bound by them, and I'm going to do whatever the hell I want to do to bring about this wonderful world that I envision I uniquely am in a position to bring into existence. So that's James Comey. Now it's of course false when he says that the FBI has a history of doing this kind of thing, great and good and the wonderful. The FBI started as a corrupt organization. In fact, Comey mentioned when he gave President Trump a briefing on the dossier, the so-called dossier, that one of the motivating factors for bringing that up and telling the president, you personally are not being investigated. There's nothing about, in the whole, I shouldn't say just the dossier, in the whole set of issues, that you personally are not being investigated. We don't suspect you of any criminal wrongdoing. The reason that he said that to the president, as he has said, is so the way the president wouldn't think that he's trying to J. Edgar Hoover him, the blackmail files. That's because the first director of the FBI was corrupt. And you've had this problem arise, director after director, senior administration after senior administration, over and over and over again. What they were trying to do to Martin Luther King Jr., obviously the Hoover things, what they're trying to do to various political officials, what Comey is trying to do. It's the notion that the rules of the law, the rule of law is super important. That's why we exist, is to make sure it's upheld. But sometimes it's inconvenient. And because inconvenience to me makes it more difficult for me to do this great good in the world that I know I'm uniquely positioned to bring about, I have to cut corners. I have to dissemble here. I have to exaggerate there. I have to be sneaky over here and not obey the policies like everybody else under the sun has to do because I'm that special. That's Jim Comey. Mueller did the same thing. He was given a mandate, you can read it online, it's now public, to investigate Russia collusion and other such matters that would be relating to it, and to, where appropriate, to bring criminal charges for such crimes as might be discovered either with that directly or incidental to it. And then there's the obstruction of justice with respect to allegedly obstructing the Russia investigation, which is clearly related to the investigation, so that's fair game. And so what does Bob Mueller do? Well, in the collusion thing, he says, well, I'm going to be a prosecutor. I'm going to go through here and do things like a normal prosecutor would, and in fact, like every prosecutor is obliged to do. I will look at all the evidence, talk to the witnesses, read all the relevant case law, read the statutes, and compare the facts that I found against statutes and then the statutes as my cat just walked by, sorry. And I'll look at the statutes in light of the case law that shades how it's to be interpreted, and then I will make prosecution decisions. Yes, prosecute here. No, don't prosecute there because there's not enough evidence. Or strike a plea bargain here to flip that person to get someone higher up on the chain. The normal things prosecutors do, day in, day out, day in, day out. He did that with the collusion bit. But when it came to the obstruction of justice thing, he starts off, it's not a team effort, you're the decision maker, you make the decision, but whatever. I'm not going to behave like a prosecutor. I actually am just not going to make a prosecutorial decision, which means that he should have stopped right there. If you are not going to make a prosecutorial decision, recommend charges, don't recommend no charges, whatever it happens to be, then you have no business at all taking advantage of compulsory process to find out information, because it doesn't matter what you find out. You have already decided, ab initio, out of the gate, from the Fonz et Origo, that you are not going to behave like a prosecutor. You're going to behave like somebody who's just nosy for the sake of being nosy. And then you're going to rationalize and justify later on your nosiness. Because you have found yourself in a situation where you are uniquely placed to be the doer of good, the finder of things that are hidden, the teller of truths, the seeker of whatever. You're that guy. You are essentially the noble cause crusader at that point. It's a total abuse of the criminal justice system for an investigation to be initiated and maintained after it has been decided that whatever we have no interest, for whatever reason, in bringing this case to a normal conclusion by deciding, yes, there is sufficient evidence to prosecute, or no, there's not sufficient evidence to prosecute, or whatever it happens, whichever way it happened, the facts happen to wind up at the end. He said from the outset, I have no interest in that at all, but I'd like to preserve some information. For what? You've already decided you're not going to do the prosecution thing. You're preserving information for what? That someone in the future might do it? Let the person in the future who gets tasked with it do it. Who's going to make the decision. You've already tainted the investigation now. But memories fade, evidence is that's all true. But now you've got the problem of you've investigated it and decided to do absolutely nothing with it, which makes it so much more difficult for anybody in the future who might want to bring a case when it's already been decided publicly that there's nothing there to pursue, that it won't be pursued for whatever particular reasons. That's the thing with Comey. He did not technically usurp the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice is still capable of bringing charges against Hillary Clinton within the statute of limitations. The decision of a police officer not to arrest, or a detective not to arrest, or an FBI agent not to arrest, does not thereby deprive the prosecutor of any legal power to do something. What it does is it makes it very difficult for the prosecutor when they're going into court, because now they have to work uphill, not only against the legal presumptions that a criminal defendant has, innocence, blah, 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 but also that it's already known that it's been decided within that agency that there's nothing there worth pursuing. And then it makes you look like you're the one on the vendetta. You're the one with the crusade. So it rhetorically handicaps the Department of Justice in the future, even though it doesn't legally do it. And of course, as anybody who's participated in trials will tell you, rhetoric is just as good as the law. Whatever works in the jury box, that's good enough, that kind of thing. And so that should have been the end of it. If you're not going to do it, just this whole notion that things needed to be preserved. I granted earlier, that's true, but let the guy in the future worry about the evaporation of evidence or the fading memories. But of course that's not true here, because the House of Representatives and the Senate can always investigate those matters too. They can't do a criminal investigation, but surely they're just as capable of issuing a subpoena to talk to people as any other official. They can file subpoenas just as well as a prosecutor can. In fact, they often do. So there are all kinds of ways that it could have been investigated, and the memories could have been preserved, the evidence preserved, without having to do this bukkake theater thing. Kabuki theater, sorry. Two different kinds of theater. I don't know what you guys are into. kabuki theater, this pantomime, this of a criminal investigation. It is not. It is the using of the powers of the grand jury, the criminal justice powers, the threat of criminal prosecution for people to get them to comply with something that is fundamentally, from the outset, already stated to be not an investigation that has a criminal aspect to it, because you've already decided that you won't prosecute. Now, a lot of people talk about that the reason he didn't prosecute is because of the OLC opinion saying that a sitting president cannot be indicted. That's not true. Bob Mueller's mandate was twofold. One was to bring charges where appropriate. So the president is sitting and you find evidence of criminal wrongdoing, obviously you can't bring charges. But the special counsel statute, the thing that creates the special counsel, is for him to file a report with recommendations and his opinions of himself to the Attorney General. So the fact that he wasn't going to and couldn't bring an indictment is not the end of the question, or end of the it's not the end of anything. That is just one aspect that can't go forward. The other aspects can still be perfectly well satisfied. But he chose, I'm not going to make recommendations. I'm going to do, a pro-con game. A little bit of this, but on the other hand, a little bit of that. And then there's a little bit of this, but on the other hand, a little bit of that. And I'm going to do this and do that and do the other. It's like, it's just I've drawn a list up and I said, well, these are the things that go one way, these things that go the other. This is pro, that's con, pro, con. It's like it's a grocery list, really. And I'm going to in order to generate this list with which nothing will be done, I'm going to use a grand jury? No, that's nonsense. That's silly shit. But, he did write his report, and people will say that it's the OLC opinion that prevents him from having made recommendations or reaching a determination. Absolutely not. He could still reach the determination, even if no prosecution could be had. But there you are. So I read through the whole report, but we're talking about here. Well, okay, the Russia collusion thing, the biggest nothing burger ever. That was no surprise. There weren't really any important things learned or to be learned from the report in that respect. What you could learn from it are details, like who talked with whom on what day and where, that kind of stuff. The nitty gritty, which nobody cares about, really. So now we get to obstruction of justice, which is not a very well named statute or crime, because it's not actually a crime to obstruct justice at all. It's perfectly legal to do it, generally. There are only certain ways that it's illegal to go about obstructing justice. So it should be the illegal obstruction of justice statutes, as opposed to just the obstruction of justice statute. I mean, every motion that a defense counsel files that gets evidence suppressed, that's obstructing justice. I mean, the evidence, if it's evidence that's can prove guilt, and you find a way to keep it out, you have obstructed the ability of the justice system to get a conviction. You have gotten valid evidence, or evidence that is probative of guilt, excluded on some other ground. So there's that. But that's perfectly okay to do. Not answering questions. And I plead the fifth. That's obstructing the investigation. It is now harder for them to find out if you did a thing when you won't tell them if you did the thing. It is much more difficult to solve cases when people go, la 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 la, I'm not listening, than it is when they go, hey, let me tell you everything I know. Oh, do come in, sucker. You have the right to remain silent, but apparently not the capacity. Do come with us. So those are all ways to obstruct justice, the proper and just conclusion to an investigation and a trial. But relevant here to criminally obstruct justice, to unlawfully obstruct justice, is composed of, well, there are many different ways you can do it, but here we're worried about a particular kind. So no one's alleging that Trump had anybody murdered or threatened to be murdered, or put a gun to someone's head and said, don't give him the whatever, don't give him the receipts. Keep my receipts, motherfucker. None of that. So we're just looking at some of the ways that possibly justice could be obstructed unlawfully, and excluding all the ones where it's not even alleged. So relevant here, you have to have a quote-unquote obstructive act and a corrupt intent. So you have to do it corruptly, which that means that you have to be able to somehow prove beyond a reasonable doubt what was in a person's mind when they did a thing. If they have some legitimate purpose for having done that thing, then it's a legit thing to have done. For example, firing the FBI director is a president's unqualified power. He can fire executive officials, the senior, he can fire officers, principal officers of the United States, and inferior officers of the United States at will, on his whim, for any reason or no reason. But what he couldn't do is say, if get bribed to go do it, then that would be a problem. But no one's alleging that anything like that happened. So Bob Mueller goes a little bit of, well, he did fire the FBI director, but the president also knew that firing the FBI, because he'd been told by his counsel, the White House counsel, that firing the FBI director does not actually make the case go away. I think Chris Christie told him this. Getting rid of the FBI director does not get rid of the FBI. The investigation does not go away because you get rid of the FBI director. So the president knew perfectly well that firing Comey would have absolutely no impact on the Russia investigation. That would still go on. So Mueller's like, but who can decide what that means? But pro con, you guys decide. I'm just a prosecutor. What do I know? I've decided, I'm just not going to do the prosecutor thing. I'm just going to be nosy and then I'm going to tattle. But anyway, I've mentioned in previous videos in the past, if you ever want to know what's going on in the world and how misconduct is happening, don't listen to politicians talk about events. Go read court cases. Read pleadings in court and read findings by judges and verdicts by juries on various issues. And the reason for this is simply that it's not speculative. Cases only get into the federal court system. Issues only get into the federal court system when there's an actual case or an actual controversy, which means that someone has done something or is in the process of doing it or is imminently going to do it. They've told you this, they just haven't formally taken the first step to do it yet. So go look there for what the government wants to do, for the rule of law that it seeks to have. And the reason for it is not the particulars of any case. Look, a bad outcome in any case is obviously terrible for the litigants, but that doesn't unmake the system. That just means that the system got it wrong. Arguing to have a rule that preserves as a rule of law the problem that was caused, that's a problem because now it applies to everybody. So that new power, that new way of viewing things is what you need to look out for. And so when you have a prosecutor who is saying that these are obstructive acts, which is what Mueller is saying, they're not potentially obstructive, they are the obstructive. He is claiming that these things in fact do obstruct justice. Now the only question is whether or not the intent was a corrupt one, or the means was a corrupt means. But he is saying this act is an obstruction of justice. And all you have to find in addition to that is some bad motive, and then you can convict. And so I read through these allegedly obstructive acts, and I'm thinking, if this is the Soviet Union did not go quite this far with defining obstructive acts. One of them was the president spoke in public about the case, about the Russia collusion narrative and various actors in it, and that this could pressure some of the witnesses, some of the potential witnesses, to do things, or not do things, based on statements the president didn't make to them, just giving an interview. If that's an obstructive act, then why isn't it an obstructive act when Adam Schiff gets on TV and talks? I mean, it's said in public. The precise way that Mueller put it was that this is the tricky bit. He says, now it's of course true that courts presume that juries follow their instructions, that jurors follow their instructions, and they obey the orders and the rules the court lays out for them. But nevertheless, says Mueller, his statements in public could influence the grand jurors, who shouldn't be watching the news on this issue, and therefore, because it's possible that one of these jurors would have watched the news or watched the interview and heard the president say various things and be thereby influenced that that is an obstructive act. I'm like, how can it possibly be an obstructive act for the president to say something in public and then for that to be heard by a person who violates the law to go find out what has been said? How is that an obstructive act on the president's part? It's an unlawful act on the grand juror's part. But the fact that a grand juror is violating the law cannot possibly transform a protected First Amendment activity into a crime or a potential crime. The man is perfectly free as any other citizen to get up in public and say his piece. And when people put questions to him, he's perfectly free to respond to them. But Mueller's position is no, actually, because when you respond in public, someone who shouldn't be listening, who it's a crime for them to listen to you speak, might nevertheless violate the law, hear you speak, and be influenced, and therefore you are the one who has done the wrong. No, the grand juror is the bad. That's the bad guy. This is exactly the same kind of bullshit with Ken Starr's independent counsel office, where they're trying to get Bill Clinton for perjury for things that other people said. They're trying to lay at his feet the words that other people spoke, and he failed to correct, even though he had no legal obligation to do it. If you haven't watched my other video, it was this. His lawyer said something, and if you can go read the articles of impeachment for Clinton. One of the charges was was perjury, and the way that he perjured himself, they said, is prior false statements made by counsel of Bill Clinton, not by Bill Clinton. And it's like, how can that possibly be perjury on the president's the president's part? Now, the way it can be that way is precisely what I mentioned in the last video, which is that impeachment is not a legal thing. I mean, it's in the Constitution, so the law allows it. But high crimes and misdemeanors don't refer to criminal statutes. They refer to political wrongdoings. And what qualifies as a proper political wrongdoing for which someone may be impeached? Anything the House of Representatives says. If they say, even if it's otherwise unconstitutional, by the way, the power is plenary. It has no restriction whatever. Whatever the violation is, it cannot be remedied in any court. So if they say, we are going to impeach Barack Obama because he's black, there is absolutely no redress except for acquittal in the Senate. If there's no acquittal in the Senate, there is no case to be. I mean, you can bring the case. Anybody can go to the courthouse and file a lawsuit, but it'll be dismissed. There is no cause of action, as the Supreme Court has repeatedly made clear, that when something is assigned to one of the political branches as a power, whatever problems arise can't be solved by courts, because the Constitution has left that matter, and therefore the judging of that matter, to that particular chamber, that body, whatever it is. It's not we can't do anything. This was brought up in the Nixon case, not President Nixon, Judge Nixon, a judge who was impeached and then convicted in the Senate, and he was suing because he was saying that he did not have a trial in the Senate, and his lawyer and he and his legal team were trying to argue that the relevant clause of the Constitution is the trial clause, and Chief Justice Rehnquist, humorously but quite appropriately, he says, you keep calling it the trial clause, a trial in the Senate, blah, blah. He said, you could just as well refer to it as the sole power clause, because it says the Senate shall have the sole power. He's like, so I don't know why you keep harping on this. The fact, and even if you assume that the thing would not pass legal muster as a trial in some other sense, because it's committed textually by the Constitution solely to the Senate, the court has no role. So go away. That guy lost. He was removed from office upon his conviction. Upon the impeachment and the trial in the Senate. But anyway, so that's how they can do it. The purpose of the Ken Starr investigation was not the criminal bit. It was to abuse the criminal justice system, to go after a political enemy of his own party, of his own friends, and then to bring, after all that compulsory process, it's much more powerful than just a subpoena. You've got a grand jury, for God's sake. It's much better than what you can get from other places. To bring that not into the courts, but into Congress so it can be leaked to damage the president, which it was. So that's how you can do that sort of thing. And this shows that, at least on the obstruction part, Bob Mueller was not behaving as a prosecutor. He's behaving as a person who wants to make a case for Congress to make decisions on. A complete abuse of the legal justice system. So, speaking in using your First Amendment right to get up in public and say your piece about various matters that might be happening, that's an obstructive act, because it's logically possible that some juror who has committed perjury in his oath, and goes out to violate the law to listen to you speak on a matter it's illegal for him to hear, might do that, and therefore it's obstructive. You've obstructed justice, possibly. But when Adam Schiff gets up on the TV and does exactly the same thing, that's not potentially an obstructive act, even though that same juror could be violating his oath that he swore, in the pains and penalty of perjury, he could still be doing the same exact conduct and be possibly, potentially, maybe influenced thereby. So I don't know why, I honestly, I don't know why, really, everyone in the country who's spoken about this publicly, the news media, is obstructing justice by, talking about public issues, because it's possible some juror out there might not take his oath seriously. You need to think very carefully about the proposition that it's a potential crime for you to speak in public because of the criminal deeds of somebody else. Or the unlawful deeds, I shouldn't say criminal. The unlawful, actually, it could be perjury. The illegal, the unlawful actions of somebody else. That is just gibberish. It's nonsense. And other things. Okay, in order for the act to count as even potentially obstructive, the person has to take some action that could potentially bring about some effect in the world that would affect some case. So you look at a lot of what Mueller had to say, and it's not even possible that what the president did could affect anything. For example, when he allegedly told Don McGahn, his White House counsel, to go have the special counsel discharged, that they say that's an obstructive act. It can't possibly be an obstructive act. The special counsel is at least an inferior officer of the United States, if not a principal officer, but he's certainly an inferior officer, at least. And he reports to a principal officer. The White House counsel is not an officer of the United States at all. He's a mere employee. He can't tell any officer of the United States to do anything. He can say anything he wants, but no officer of the United States is obligated to do what he says. It cannot produce the effect, because he has no power to do it. The president, the obstructive act could just as easily be, and the president picked up his Pez dispenser, and he said verily unto thee, Mr. Pez dispenser, march thine ass down to the Department of Justice, and tell the Attorney General of the United States to do something. It has the same capacity to produce that effect in the world, which is to say, absolutely none whatever. And if you look at the pay scale, the White House counsel's maximum pay scale tops out at the bottom part of Executive 2, or is it Executive 3? It's either, anyway, whatever it is, it's certainly below a principal officer position, which is Executive Level 1, and it's capped at their base pay. So a proper Executive Level 2 official, Executive Schedule Level 2, like the Deputy Attorney General, who may or may not be a principal officer of the United States, they get allowances and these other things that would not be available to a White House counsel or counselors to the president, who are capped at the minimum base pay for executives. So it makes clear that they are not Executive Level 2 officials. They're not officers of the United States. They are mere employees. Now, they're advisors and aides to the president, and I suppose I should talk about this just a minute. When I was in the military, I was an aide to a command sergeant major, and then later, the guy who became general, who just recently retired with his three stars, and that's how I got to work with him, because he was the commander at the time, and then when he got promoted, he took me. And one of the things that when you are an aide, whether an enlisted aide or an aide de camp or whatever happens, you're on the general staff, whatever position you happen to hold. you have to be very circumspect when you go out to various places and talk to people, because they will take what you say to be an indication of what the boss wants. But it's also true that if you tell them, if you say something innocuous like, you'll know things that when your boss is going to go out and do an inspection, you'll know things that they're looking for, and so you go to the various units ahead of the time. You're like, here's the things he looks for. So if I were you, I would do this. They understand that you're just giving them a heads up, and that it would be foolish for them to decline to take your advice, because you know what the guy looks for when he shows up. And there are other things, there are innocuous things that people in positions of authority will send out through their staff, informally. And, staff talks to staff. Sometimes staff talks to the principal because the principals for the boss are inferior ranks than him. But you never forget for a moment that you are quite likely, if not the absolute lowest ranking person there, certainly one of the lowest ranking people there. And you're going to be talking, to majors, lieutenant colonels, command sergeants major, first sergeants, things of that nature. And you have to make certain that you don't, as the phrasing goes, don't try to wear your boss's stars. He's the general, you aren't, or he's the sergeant major, you aren't. You are staff. You're his aide. But nevertheless, you do have a bit of power. The military defines power in a couple different ways, and you have like direct power, and then you have indirect power, or formal and informal power. And the informal power is simply your proximity to the guy who makes decisions. You can whisper in his ear, which other people don't get to do. Incidentally, one of the most important positions that everybody hated back in the days of executive kings in England was the guy, I can't remember the formal titles, like something of the bedchamber, keeper, master of the bedchamber, whatever it is. He's the guy who sat in the shitter with the king when the king's taking a shit. You hand him his straw to wipe his ass. It was one of the best positions to have, because you got one-on-one FaceTime with the king, and while he's sitting there squeezing one out, you have an opportunity to mention things. So it was a somewhat influential position, because you could recommend things to him, and after all, if he decides yes, then that's what happens. But anyway, what you never do is, because you can't go to some unit and fire somebody, and you can't go there and say, hey, you're fired because the boss told me to fire you. That just does not happen. That order, the firing order, has to come from that person who has the authority, the legal power to do it himself. There are certain things you can't delegate, and certainly things that you can't have someone who has no legal power to do anything. You can't have them go do it. Now, so when you're an aide and you go tell people something, they always have the option, because they're the ones who have legal power. They're the ones with the commission. They're the ones who are appointed to that, and they always have at their disposal two options. They can take what you say at face value, which happens, or they can tell you to fuck off, which does happen. Now, you've got to be very careful with the go fuck yourself line, because they know as soon as you tell me to go fuck myself, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go right back to the boss and say, he said go fuck yourself. To me, not to you. And that means that if I'm right, then the next conversation that's going to be had is not going to be through me or some other aide. It's going to be the boss going there directly to say this. But that is always that person's option. And they will exercise it. And certainly, if the thing is that you're going to tell them is, hey, you're fired, that is certainly a case where they're going to say, if the boss wants me fired, the boss can come fire me. You get the hell out of here. So the notion that telling the White House counsel, who has no legal power to do anything other than give the president advice, which anybody could do, by the way, for free, it's just not. It can't possibly produce that effect in the world, because no principal officer of the United States, no head of a department, is going to go, oh my God, the White House counsel's decided to fire me today. Oh wait, I don't work for him. Go fuck yourself. That's what you're gonna get. That's the response you're going to get. Or asking Lewandowski to go ask Jeff Sessions to unrecuse himself. That can't possibly be an obstruction of justice. Anybody can go ask somebody to do something. There's it's the Public Oversight Board, POBs. I can't remember what it stands for. Michael Carvin was from Jones Day was litigating this in the Supreme Court, and Elena Kagan was on one side of it, and this dealt with the double for cause protection. So the person at issue was could only be removed for cause by a principal officer or by their boss, who could only be removed by the president for cause. And so the Supreme Court struck this down and says, no, that you can't do that. The president has to be able to directly fire someone in that chain of command in order for him to maintain control over these various functions. But the Chief Justice, when Kagan was up there, asked, he's like, what is the, quickest way? And Scalia, she got this question in many different ways. What is it that the president can do with these people? And Kagan said, well, he can ask them to do something. And Scalia said, yes, and they can say no. He says, I can ask them. Anybody can. And they can tell me the same thing they can tell the president. Then it doesn't sound like he's the boss. And so the Chief Justice put it to her. It's like, what's the quickest way to get rid of one of these guys? And she said, well, the quickest, most legally secure way would be to contact this person to go to that. And Chief Justice says, no, the quickest way would be to pick up the phone and say, you're fired, get out. That's the quickest way to get rid of it. That's the power of a boss, is to say, you're done, go home, get out. And if there's something else in there that the president has to do, then clearly the president does not have control over those officials. And the Constitution does seem to say that there is one chief executive who shall have the executive power, and if he can't pick up the phone and fire someone. And then Kagan said something like, well, there's a for cause requirement, so he could fire them for cause. And I think it was Scalia, I can't remember, maybe it was someone else who said yes, which excludes obeying, disagreeing with the president. If the president says, I want X, and they say, no, sir, you're going to get Y, that is not for cause under the way the statute is worded. So the Supreme Court struck that down. It's just there seems to be in the media, and a lot of lawyers, incidentally, have this confusion about who can do what. And so it's just all of these weird things. The fact that the president asks someone to go ask someone to reconsider something, that can't possibly be an obstructive act. Or if it is, then every defense counsel in the land is obstructing justice merely by asking prosecution to reconsider. That's well, you gave us your offer, but I'd like to give you a counter offer. I'm asking you to reconsider. Oh my God! How dare you obstruct justice by asking me to reconsider I'm going to go tell this to the judge. Fuck off. So it's just a whole bunch of things that, even if they're true, they can't possibly produce the effect in the world, which would be, I guess, not a defense counsel going to ask prosecutor, but having some hobo. Hey, hobo, go tell the prosecutor I want him to drop the charges against me. Oh, that's obstruction of justice. Oh, janitor, go fire the judge. These things that can't possibly have any effect in the real world, precisely because the people who have the legal power look at it and go, huh, I've heard your request denied, or I appreciate that you think I appreciate that you would fire me if you were my boss. I guess it's to my good it's my good fortune that I don't work for you. Go away. And there is just a lot of that in Mueller's report. None of which should have been in there, because he shouldn't have investigated it to begin with, because he decided out of the gate he wasn't going to make a prosecutorial decision, which is to say, to decide whether there is or whether there is not sufficient evidence to procure a conviction, even if no prosecution can be brought today. So it's also telling that out of all of the decision makers, the Attorney General, Deputy Attorney General, OLC people, no one agreed with Bob Mueller's view of obstruction of justice. They all disagreed. They all thought, no, even if everything here is true, none of this is a crime if the president does it. It's not a crime if anybody else did it too. And you hear this in the media. The president has done things which, if he were any other person, he would be indicted for. Really? You think that someone's going to be I'd be indicted for obstruction of justice if I call the White House counsel's office and say, hey, White House counsel, well, you've never heard of me, but you know what? I don't like a case that's in the courts right now. I want you to go fire the U.S. attorney for that district. All right? So, you go there and fire the U.S. attorney. There is no way in hell I'm going to be indicted. The fact he's the president means only he could potentially be indicted because he's the only, or AG, there's the only people who could fire the U.S. attorney. But then again, he can't be indicted for firing any of his officials because they work for him at will. The Constitution grants him plenary power to remove them. He doesn't owe anybody an explanation. He can give whatever explanation he wants, so long as it doesn't include bribery or something, something like that. Then he can do it and get it. That's his power. The Constitution grants it to him. And the reason for this is that if the president is a big asshole, you get to vote him out. And the impeachment clause is there for the really important things, not this kind of shit right here, for things for which the Republic cannot withstand. That's a terribly worded sentence. Incidents which the Republic cannot withstand if they're allowed to continue, where it's really pressing that whatever the problem is, it simply cannot wait for the next election, like treason, or I don't know, he's manufacturing evidence to have his political enemies convicted, things of that nature, or he's having people arrested to keep them from getting to the Congress to pass votes that would, pass some bill, override his veto on something that doesn't, whatever, things like that. Things where it's really important that this cannot wait. The president has to go, and he has to go right now. And that's why the pain of an impeachment is put in there, because it's a political. You have to decide, House of Representatives, that you're going to surrender your legislative agenda, because nothing's getting done, and you have to be prepared at the next election to say that this really was an incident of a type which the Republic just cannot withstand its continuance. We had to act now. We had to say, yes, American people, you guys voted in free and fair elections to put this guy in office, but this thing happened that was so bad we had to save you from yourselves. And if you can't say that it's the kind of incident where you have to save the people from themselves, because you're the only one left until the next election, so you have to save them from their previous decision. Unless it's that kind of thing, you have no business impeaching people. Even though you can, as a matter of raw power, you could do it. If you're not going to even bother with the prosecutorial decision, you have no business asking the grand jury to help you. You have no business taking statements from people. You have no business doing any of this. You leave it alone. Just leave it alone. But no, he's not going to do anything. He's not going to make recommendations. Not going to decide what the evidence says. Just not going to do anything like what a prosecutor would do. In other words, he has decided that unlike all other prosecutors who use compulsory process to get to the end of the matter and to make a decision, he's decided that he uniquely is not required to do that in order to take advantage of all of the legal power of the criminal justice system. But instead, what he can do is just hand it off to the Congress. That is, hand it off to politicians to do the political thing rather than keeping it and do the legal thing. He's decided, he chose on that element where to go. He did well on the collusion thing. I don't see anything criminal in there. It seems like it was all thoroughly run down. So on that, good. The other part, he owes the Treasury a refund because he wasted its money. He wasted your tax dollars for a fundamentally political endeavor that has the thinnest patina. It's a masquerade of actual proper judicial conduct or judicial officer type conduct, investigative conduct. Now, about this 700-ish former federal prosecutors who say that everything under the sun shows that Trump is obviously guilty of obstruction of justice. The media is going on about how there are this many. It reminds me of creationists who say we have 200 scientists who question Darwinism, or pick your unpopular scientific theory and size. We have like architects and engineers, 100 of them that say that the World Trade Tower must have been brought down by an inside job. It could not possibly have gone any other way. And one of the responses to the creationists was Project Steve, where we're going to get thousands of people just named Steve scientists just named Steve who agree generally with Darwin's theory of evolution. They found 700 prosecutors out of many tens of thousands of former federal prosecutors. At any given time, there are 5,000 or so active, and who knows how many tens of thousands that are retired. So yeah, you managed to find 2% of former prosecutors. Ooh, it's like, this is really amazing. When they say things like, Bob Mueller thought this. Yeah, Bob Mueller did, but his boss didn't. His boss's boss didn't. And the gurus, the OLC people, didn't think he was, no, I'm sorry, I don't know where he gets this from. This is not, these legal theories are bizarre. So, there's nothing there. Now, the Democrats will say that, and Bob Mueller, once again, being a political hack here, and not at all like a prosecutor, he is reversing the judicial system, because what he's doing here is not it's fundamentally not a judicial act. It's not geared towards the judicial system at all. It's geared towards politics. When he says we could not exonerate the president on these charges. And that means what? Your prosecutor, your job is not to exonerate. Your job is to determine whether there is or is not sufficient evidence to sustain a conviction. And if you don't bring charges, and it's not because of a plea bargain, to get someone, flipping someone to get someone higher up on the chain of command, or it's not a resource constraint, which here it obviously wasn't, or some kind of policy thing. This isn't the kind of crime we care about, so we're not worried about. Whenever you, as the prosecutor, say, we're not bringing charges, that means the presumption of innocence stands. That is as close to an exoneration as you get. I mean, the only way you get the exoneration is to be found not guilty, which you can't when you don't believe that you have the capacity to maintain a prosecution. Is not even a live question. You have to first get in the door. You have to first decide that there is sufficient evidence to get the conviction in order to go into the court to find out, oh, actually the jury said we were wrong. Sorry. But he said, I'm not doing any of that. I'm just going to do this, and now I'm going to dog whistle for the Congress. It's a fundamentally political act, which is fine for the political branches to do. It's not fine for special counsel to be doing, any more than it was fine for independent counsel. I'm fundamentally opposed to these ideas of an independent counsel and a special counsel because they never behave like proper prosecutors. It's either in the independent counsel's case that there is one man out there whom we hate, and we're going to appoint someone to follow this guy around 24 hours a day and just look at everything he does until we find a crime. We're going to review everything in his past as far back as we possibly can to see if, when he was a teenager, he may have shoplifted something. Same thing, or not exactly the same, but similar kind of, you are our target, we're going to try to get you, mentality that just seems to arise, coupled with I guess after you work in government for a long enough period of time, you start to really be intoxicated with your own importance, where I'm not going to behave like a prosecutor, but I'm going to be a prosecutor this week, but I'm not going to be one that week. I'm going to claim to be one, I'm going to cash the check, but I'm not going to do the job. Or I'll do it halfway, and I'll phone it in here. I'll do well here, and political hack. I mean, it's nonsense. Stop it. Get out of it. Stop this shit. If you want a political investigation, the Democrats are happy to give it to you. They are really happy, apparently, not to get anything done, and they're very happy, it seems, to fulfill none of their campaign promises. So, whatever. That's what I have to say about that so far. Have a great day.